Hey everybody, welcome back to the Live Ultralight podcast powered by Outdoor Vitals. Today we're going to be covering a topic that's really centered around how gear is made and that there's a ton of misconceptions out there. So me and Brigham here are going to just be, exploring the topic of how gear is really made and sometimes just the funny nuances or the things that maybe we even used to believe about how gear is made. But how are things going, Brigham?
They're going well. Yep, summer's in full swing.
I know we just were talking about plans yesterday, but how's the summer been so far, and what's the outlook looking like as far as just getting out and enjoying it?
It's been good so far. Weather-wise, we went like from spring to hot summer like in a 7-day period. I went out of town, you went out of town pretty much at the same time, and it felt like a nice spring, June. It was like 70s, and then we got back and it was mid-90s, and it was pretty crazy. But I've had a backpacking trip last week with a couple of my kids, and then I'll be out in the mountains every week for like the next 4 or 5 weeks. So it'll be good.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. We take off this Sunday to start driving at least, and then all of next week we'll be out on the trail. Clicking off 100 miles on the Colorado Trail, which I think we're all pretty amped about. I was looking at the trail this morning. It's exciting. It's a lot of high country, which is stuff that we absolutely love, and be a lot of elevation climbing, which is something we also tend to enjoy. But just some new cool country, and I'm getting amped up about it.
Yeah,
I'm trying.
For sure.
I will say this. I am trying to get like my gear packed, my food packed well in advance this time. That's probably the single thing that is like the biggest pain point or the biggest thing that keeps me from getting excited about trips is if I don't get packed early enough and like it's the night before and I'm packing and I know I should be sleeping, that whole situation. I don't know. I run my life too busy or I delay it too much, but I'm on a good trajectory this week to not be doing that scramble come Saturday night.
Yeah, we talked about it yesterday. My only stress is not packing. Packing's like the easiest, like I don't think about it part, but food, shopping for food, selecting food, and then planning out the food situation. That's my stress point. Is I always feel like I don't do a good job, and I kind of just get some things together, and I'm never like suffering from it, but it's like that's my stress point. Is I always feel like I do a suboptimal job of planning and packing my food.
I would second that. I've had situations where I've thought I've packed the right food, got out there and realized I didn't want any of it. I've had situations where I've packed phenomenal food and just felt like I was eating, at a 5-star restaurant every day. It felt, like as far as just how much I wanted to eat the food that I had. And last year on the Uinta Highline Trail, which is our last 100-mile effort as a team, I did not pack like I normally would. I definitely threw things together last minute. I was just throwing things in a bag to hit certain calorie levels, and I paid for it. And that was hopefully a lesson I'll remember for a long time and not need to maybe relearn it. I think maybe you can do that at times when it's 1-2 nights and get away with it, but by day like 4, I was just done with the food that I had brought, specifically for like lunch and snacks, because my dinner and my breakfast are very consistent. I pretty much eat an Alpenfuel in the morning for breakfast every time, and a peak refuel meal for night. We are going to be trying out some new food on this trip, so that'll be interesting. If we love it, you'll probably see it in the members area here in the near future. So we'll try to report back on that. If you don't hear back from us, that means we probably didn't love it. But I think it shows a lot of promise and gives a little bit more variety, just meal options. And so I'm excited to try some of them. We got to sample some of them at Outdoor Retailer recently, and from what we tasted there, we were excited. So
yeah, it was pretty good. We'll see.
Okay, so again, coming back to this topic of you don't know how outdoor gear is developed. It's kind of this blanket statement. It came up in a meeting recently that there's a lot of misperceptions out there, and that pretty much everyone in the office had misperceptions before coming in. Brigham, I'd imagine that you probably had misperceptions before going through a design program or whatever involvement you wherever it started for you. But I think typically there's just these confusion points for people that don't understand how gear is made, don't understand maybe brands and how things work with specific brands, and kind of everything in between. So I'm going to start off. I'm going to pose a question that is the most common question I get when I introduce myself, and they ask, what do you do for work or what do you do for a living? And I, tell them about Outdoor Vitals. Typically the most common question I get is like, how do you produce your goods? Do you have a factory? Do you own a factory overseas? Or do you, like the idea or the concept here is that because we design all the gear, we develop all the gear, we produce all the gear, and we sell the gear, that we actually own the factories that are doing the cut and sew or, everything in between. And so I want to really break that down of why to us, I think on the day-to-day basis, we kind of laugh or balk at that. But from the outside perspective, that was a belief I also had, right? I believed that companies like Patagonia or North Face or fill in the blank had their own factories when I was growing up and didn't know any different. I thought that like literally Patagonia had a Patagonia factory sitting in Vietnam or had a Patagonia factory sitting in Colombia, and that the goods that were coming out of those countries were literally produced under a factory that they had 100% ownership over. And again, I think to me, that was the first and foremost question that came to mind, and the first and foremost question that I just consistently get when people find out that we, design and develop and have an outdoor brand. So what is the answer to that, Brigham? Do they or do they not? And then let's get into the why.
Well, as is my personality, I don't want to. We couldn't possibly speak for every brand out there, and I do think that it would not be accurate to say that nobody owns their own factory, nobody manufactures their own gear in their own facility. But it is probably much less common, and the reality is we are us. We don't know what everybody else does. That's one thing. I'd say that's a misconception about the industry, is that if you are in the industry, that you just know everything about the industry, and you know what everybody else does, what everybody else uses, and all this, and that's just not true. So most accurately, we can speak to what we know for ourselves, but you do gain a lot of insight and awareness of a lot of the generalities within the industry, because we deal with factories that are manufacturing products for a number of other brands, and we're made aware of those brands. So I'd say it's most common that brands do not, own their own manufacturing or sewing facility or whatever the product is, especially in soft goods, which is, sewn products. It's very common for there to be big, large manufacturing facilities that many, many brands work with and have their products produced there.
Maybe let's talk for a second before we move through this question further of like, who would produce their own goods, right? Because there are people out there that for sure do. And I think it's in our industry, it's probably just easy to call out that there are certain cottage style companies that's kind of the nature of a cottage style company, is that they maybe start by sewing their own stuff, and then some of them scale it and some of them will ship it off to be made somewhere else. Yeah,
that's definitely true. That's definitely a case with, like you say, a lot of the cottage brands. But I would say that there's even some clarifications that can be done there. Like, there are brands that own their own manufacturing, they do their own manufacturing, and I wouldn't call them cottage brands. They would be probably bigger than us, and they own their own factory, they manufacture their products there, and I would not consider that like people making stuff out of their garage. Like, there are plenty of brands. It's much less common, but there are companies bigger than us making their own products in their own facilities that they own, that are a legitimate manufacturing facility. It's just much less common. The majority of brands are doing it, and probably doing it at large facilities. So I wouldn't want to speak in a way that says like the cottage industry, they're the only people manufacturing their own gear in their own facilities, because that's not the case. It's just very uncommon.
Yeah. I would just emphasize that too. Very uncommon. And I would also say that it would be very uncommon for any brand to even have a small equity stake in a factory or something like that. I think that was another misperception I might have had personally, is that maybe they come in and partner with the factory. Well, the word partner can also be used interchangeably, right? Because in some senses, a partnership could be like an equity, a piece of ownership in a factory. In other senses, it can just be, no, we have a great relationship, a long-term working relationship. Yeah. And that is the more common use of the word partnership within this industry as well. But so why would a company, let's say as big as Patagonia, who produces somewhere around $1 billion worth of sales a year, why would they not own their own factory? And I guess let's just start with that question.
I'll preface this with, this is 100% speculation.
We're having fun here. We're not necessarily answering everything super factual, but from our seat at the table, the entire conversation is going to be from our seat at the table, what we know. But we're not, don't go quoting this to anyone. Don't go. Yeah, I mean, just kind of throw that out there yet again.
Yeah, so this is speculation. So I would imagine that, a large brand like that would choose to not own their own factory just for diversification of, scheduling production, and frankly, the volume could not be contained within one factory. So it just makes sense to have multiple factories running different lines, different product lines, different product types. So it's a very practical, in my mind, speculating why. It would be a very practical based thought process and decision-making process of, just diversification of product lines, scheduling, timing, shipping, and meeting the demands, like the sales demands that they have in terms of volume and numbers. So I think that would be my overall top kind of set of reasons.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I would add in there and speculate about and from our position as a business too, would be that it's very difficult to be the best at everything, right? So if we're the best at, say, the designing side of the product, if we were to own a factory, we'd have to then become the best at the manufacturing side. And that's an entirely different thing. And then depending on the product at hand, we'd have to become the best at waterproof seam taping and other aspects that just take either a lot of machinery, they take a lot of skill set, they take a lot of, it's massive endeavors to undertake versus letting someone else come in and own that, be 100% in charge of that, and make that their what they can be the best in the world at for their in that situation, and then we can just tap into that. So there's factories out there that will just produce waterproof jackets. There's factories out there that will just produce tents. There's factories out there that will just produce a specific kind of a tent. And the list goes on and on and on. And so what that really allows them to do is, have the right skill set, have an incredible amount of experience in that specific product for sewers and workers and everyone else involved with that process. And it just really lends itself to a better finished end result. If you did have a factory that was making everything under the sun and claiming that they're doing it at the highest level possible, that would be a red flag, I would think, for either of us to be like. It
would definitely warrant some further investigation. Mm-hmm. Unless it's just absolutely massive. So with manufacturing facilities, we'll just call them factories. To your point about kind of the specialization of product type, right? So any business, generally a business in manufacturing, their money making is in maximizing efficiency in terms of time and labor. So if is a much more challenging prospect to maximize that cost efficiency with a broad spectrum of products being manufactured there. If you can become just A+, like super efficient with, like you said, waterproof breathable jackets and seam taping, then you know that you only have to buy a limited type of machinery, right, to make a limited type of product, and then you maximize, that factory is able to maximize efficiency, and that savings is passed on to the brand, like let's say us or any other brand. So a brand is able to capitalize on the efficiency of a factory that, say, makes just tents or just backpacks. That factory has done everything they can to maximize that efficiency for cost and resources, and so that's where the diversification comes in, because a brand is able to, select a factory for different types of products that is now maximized with efficiency, and then that savings is passed on to the brand and to the customer. Whereas the other thing with factories is, okay, let's say brand X pulls in $1 billion a year. Well, if that brand were to manufacture everything in their own factories, I would say their overhead is probably 10x that $1 billion number, if not more. So to own a factory that can make, let's say, waterproof jackets, rain jackets, the machinery, just the sewing machines, and let's say at a high volume. So they've got 1,500 sewers. Okay, that's probably between 500 and 1,000 sewing machines, just sewing machines. Each one of those machines is $10,000. Okay, now if you get into seam taping machines, they might have 50 seam taping machines, or let's say 20. Well, each one of those machines is probably $40,000. So now you've got to have just that product line. But if that brand is trying to make everything for themselves, rain jackets, backpacks, apparel, shoes. So you've got thousands and thousands of machines racking up into the millions of dollars just in machinery, and then all those employees and the labor, and then the building itself. You're talking a double-digit $1 million building, and the property to acquire or the taxes. I mean, it's just insane, and there's just it just doesn't make a lot of sense at that scale to try to do it, for oneself as a brand. So,
yeah, I mean, you can see just how complicated and how fast it would become complicated, as well as the investment. There's a couple of areas I want to go with this, and I want to do what we can also to pull this back to finished goods that's going to matter to you as a backpacker, you as a user. One of the things I would say, though, is especially when you're talking about with massive brands, you could buy a pair of, say, Salomon shoes that's going to come out of India, and you could buy a pair of Salomon shoes that would come out of Vietnam, because they're actually running the same exact pair of shoes in multiple factories for diversification purposes. And there's advantages as a business for that. But there's, as a user, there could be issues with that as well, right? So, because it always comes back to how good are their partners, how good are they able to manufacture both of these in both countries. But from a business perspective, that is a very common thing to do, to run product in multiple countries for diversification. The other thing that I think is a misperception that people don't think about, like I think if they stopped and thought about this, it would make a ton of sense, right? But you don't have one, like everything to make, let's say, even a sun hoodie or a jacket or a backpack. Everything doesn't come out of one factory. And what I mean by that is they don't make the fabrics there and then the trims there, so like the zippers, and they don't make the buckles there and the buttons or whatever it is. All of these parts don't just come and are manufactured inside of one factory. And I think this is part of why that also plays into this is like where would this stop essentially? But if you were to make, let's say, a backpack like our Ultralight, well, you're going to be buying Duraflex buckles, and you're going to be buying a YKK zipper. You're going to be buying mesh that likely is coming from this fabric supplier, and then you're likely going to be buying the actual main fabric component for us, the Ultralight fabric, and that's going to be coming from this supplier out in Taiwan, and then and it's just going to go on and on and on, where you're sourcing tons and tons of components, and you're really bringing them under one roof just for the assembly part of that. So when you pull it back again to like, well, why wouldn't a massive company have their own manufacturing facilities? Well, it's like, well, they could. Let's say they went and they did do a cut and sew facility, but like they're still having to source everything, and there's still a ton of different factories specialized in a ton of different things all over. Let's just say it was fabrics. There's so much to making a fabric and developing a fabric and testing a fabric, and so much, as far as investment goes, as far as skill set goes, as far as machinery goes, as far as, just all of these things. And so really when you guys get any finished good, it's coming like that, components of that and basically the piece itself has come out of numerous factories from all over the world. And it's really a remarkable thing when you think about just how complicated it is to pull all that together into a finished product. And, over decades of time, it's become more and more streamlined. But it's really a remarkable thing and something that I think is people understand, but they never really stop to think about that, like that fabrics are not being made in the same factory, typically, that the sewing is being done at.
It's a really common everyday way to kind of parallel or to draw a comparison to is think of a pizza. So pizza is made of dough and then some ingredients. Well, to make that dough required flour, yeast, some other things. So you go to a restaurant that makes pizza for you. They bought the flour, the yeast, all those ingredients, maybe from the same supplier, but those raw ingredients came from one supplier. And maybe they mixed the dough at the restaurant, but maybe they don't. There's pizza joints out there that buy their finished dough from a finished dough supplier. Okay, so now you have flour coming from one direction, going to a dough maker. Dough maker goes to the restaurant, but that restaurant can't make a pizza with just dough, so they have to have sauce. So they may buy a finished sauce. They may mix the sauce. So finished sauce, again, is broken down to a finished sauce supplier that buys all the raw ingredients from multiple suppliers to make the finished sauce. Or they make the sauce themselves. They source the raw ingredients. They make the sauce themselves, put it on the pizza. Same thing with the cheese, coming from dairy farmers to dairy product manufacturers. So now you've sourced the cheese. And now you've got pepperoni and sausage, 2 different meats, 2 different suppliers. You've got vegetables, different farms. I mean, it's
kind of endless.
There's so many things that are similar in life, but I mean, we just tend not to realize it or think about it, but it really is, So with sewn products, a fabric is made from a raw product. That's a yarn that's made from different fibers, and oftentimes those fiber manufacturers are taking that raw product, shipping it off to a yarn manufacturer who's making the yarn and then shipping that off to the fabric mill, and then the mill is taking all that, weaving it together to a product. They may or may not do finishing treatments or waterproofing, laminations, or coatings at that same facility. That may move to another facility that specializes in lamination. And then that's going to be shipped to the cut and sew or the sewing manufacturing facility that is now kind of like the central hub where all the ingredients land to be put together, assembled to make a finished product.
I'm going to stop us here for just one second because I think it's very overwhelming to hear all of that. And I feel like one thing that can be taken away from all of that is be conscious about the purchases you make. Because while you may just be buying, one little widget, one little whatever it is in day-to-day, everything, right? Whether it's pizza or backpacks or anything in between, there is a ton of just impact and logistics and everything involved to get even something that could be purchased for $1 to that point. And so to me, the farther I get into this side, the more you just realize, like, be conscious about what you buy, buy stuff that's going to last you, all those kinds of things. Cause just even buying cheap junk that you're going to use one time and throw away or fill in the blank, like the amount of just impact when it comes to logistics, when it comes to, the parts that go into that, whether that be plastics, whether that be anything in between, they're real and they're substantial. And there's just, like I say, you will likely never understand how deep of a system or I don't know, I can't think of the right word, cycle it takes to develop even some of the most simple items out there. Whether it's that, Gatorade bottle sitting on the table here, like the plastics. Well, what components go into that plastic that makes that specific plastic to be that density, to be that, all of those kinds of things are really substantial. And I think we should always be very conscious about where we put our money, what we're purchasing, because I've said this before, I'll say it again, we're voting with the world that we want through our dollars. Okay. So this one flows really well. This is another one just on the list here of kind of questions that or misconceptions is, why does it take so long to make a product? When we have an idea for a product, why does it take years, often years, to get that product into fruition? And I feel like we've started to answer that already, just by breaking down just all of the different steps involved. And I would say in different podcasts, we've break down how much testing is also involved. So between all of the complicated steps involving tons of factories often to develop one prototype, then we'll typically take one prototype, test it, and send it back for more changes over and over again. And so that's a massive component. The other thing, though, that maybe we talk about a little bit less is just capacities of factories to produce things. Depending on different times of year, COVID effect, whatever it is, capacities can drastically range. But I would say most factories are going to sit in a position or try to optimize for a position that they have the ability for us to submit a PO and start sewing on that PO, let's say 90 days later. Why 90 days? Well, a lot of times you're looking at something like fabric lead times. You're looking at sourcing all of the trims and any components. You're bringing it in there. They don't want that to be arriving on the 29th and then them to start sewing on the 30th, right? Because they're running a massive scale, and if one thing is missing, they can't start. So they want buffer room themselves. And so really the fastest I've ever heard of is about a 90-day period for them to even start sewing. Well, then they start sewing, and they're going to be sewing for 30 days to produce whatever purchase order has been placed, and then you still got to ship it over to us. So really fast case scenario, you might be looking at 5 months from the time we say go on a project and send money over to the time that we would get that product back. And that's some of the best case scenario. We've had situations where it's taken more than 12 months in the heart of COVID when the outdoor spike was at its peak, and tons of other people manufacturing are also throwing in really big purchase orders to try to keep up with demand. And then it just goes down the list to every single component, because you could just be waiting on one zipper that's out of stock that they can't produce. And that's happened where I can't think of an example, but I feel like we've had that happen where they come back and say, we just can't get this. Do you guys want to do an alternate, or do you want to wait? And so it's extremely interesting when you start to peel back the curtain a little bit in transparency of what it looks like, to realize, like, yeah, 5 months is actually speedy quick. I mean, how would you guys imagine yourself being the owner of a factory with, let's say, 3,000 workers and literally accepting a PO and being expected to ship it in 30 days? That would mean that in 30 days, if you didn't get a purchase order, you've got 2,000 to 3,000 people that don't have work to do, right? So they want to have a buffer themselves. There's an optimal amount of work that they have in the pipeline to stay safe and consistent in their minds as well. And so it's definitely interesting, but there's all of these touch points that all add up to why it takes so long to make a product. It could even be, in the case of, say, our certain products of ours. I'll go with the Nova line of jackets. Well, we're custom making a fabric. So now we've got a custom fabric that has to be produced in a factory, and they have to adjust machinery. They have to test it out. They have to do small quantity, batches to make sure it's even going to work to begin with. There's tons of steps to even get to that point, which then means that the prototype is going to take twice as long before it gets into our hands to even start testing. So there's so many areas where projects could take way longer than you would think. It just takes just one of those to go wrong to tip the whole domino to make a product maybe go from 12 months of idea to being out there to 24 or 36.
Yeah.
We've seen it all.
Yeah. It's definitely multifaceted. I mean, there's kind of two main prongs. Is like there's the design and the development, like testing side, and then there's the manufacturing supplier side, where on the supplier side, it really is, we're just taking a place in line. Like that really, it comes right down to that. Like we place a PO for a tent, we're now in line. Wherever we fall in line for all those different materials, and then the sewing, the main manufacturing facility, we've just taken a place in multiple lines, and that's just how it is. Because of all the parts and pieces that have to be made, each one of those, we just fall in line. And then, like you mentioned before, on like the design and development side, the testing side, we don't just place, we don't just send off a design and place an order for it and then it comes. We really want to refine the product and test it and kind of vet it out and make sure that it's going to do what it's designed to do, and that almost always, every single time requires many, many prototypes and lots of, in our case, it's usually miles or nights. So just lots of time in the field where we're testing something out, because you can't just test something out once or twice. You may get a feeling about something and then take it out to another environment on another trip, test it out again, and you get a different feeling for it, whether that's good or bad. And we really try to weed that out and filter through all of that. So that process in and of itself is usually like close to a year, just the prototype testing process, not to mention the manufacturing, the lines that we have to wait in.
Okay, I've got another question here, but I wanted to maybe give you a chance, Brigham, if you ever get asked things that are misconceptions when they find out that you design product as a career path. I don't know. It's hard to think of like misconceptions people have. It's almost like there's like some voids in understanding or information that people have or even that I had. But we've kind of covered one is like, okay, so do you make it and then you sew it type thing, and we've kind of talked about that. That's not how we do it. There's a lot of things that I could prototype and sew up myself, but it's just terribly inefficient. So that's just not how we choose to do it. I think that is probably a really good one, though, is like when someone hears that you're a product designer, or if they're like, I would love to design product, I think they likely envision, sewing up a million prototypes and just spending a lot of time, we'll say, in the design studio versus working, through digital methods, drawing out things on computers.
Sure.
I think that is just a pretty frequent misconception, is that like I want to be a product designer. I just want to be sewing product all day. And that's, like Brigham said, it's actually really inefficient. It's not the best use of time unless you're more of a sewer than a designer.
And I would say it's inefficient for us. It may not be as inefficient, or even it might not be inefficient for some other brand and their business structure at all. For us,
true.
It's just inefficient. Now, I will say I have the technical capability and the skill set to sew pretty much anything that we make. I was educated for that in my schooling, but I really enjoy it.
Worked in
it's like you definitely feel the full process of creation when you're doing that, and I really do enjoy it. But it's for our business structure, it's very inefficient because we have multiple product lines under development ongoing, and we don't necessarily we definitely aren't trying to rush development along, but we do have to stay relevant in terms of, we don't want to start something and then 6 years later release it. I mean, because then 4 other brands have released something better 3 years ago, so there is timeliness of it. And so when it comes to the efficiency, I can't just dedicate all this time to one product, because I will say that to mentally and then graphically design something and then physically create it is, to me, the full spectrum of product design. Because to create something is to design it, and I don't think one can fully understand the design of something if they are not physically capable of putting that piece together. So it is a lot of fun. It is really it's rewarding work. But for us, like I said, so many product lines being developed at the same time. For me to take 1 to 2 weeks to sew up prototypes of one product, that just set 8 other products behind 2 weeks. And so we can have multiple prototypes being made in different facilities at the same time, and it's just so efficient for us, and it works really well.
Yeah. Okay, so another question that I have is, okay, so if we're all using, and I guess we didn't specifically say this, but more or less factories that we're using, or maybe other, they're obviously producing other top name products at the same time that they're producing ours. You could say the same, for any of these brands out here that are utilizing, that are not the anomaly that are producing for themselves. Their fabric is being run next to this other fabric that's being run. You're having the same conversations, a lot of the same relationships, obviously the same CEO of this factory. So if all of the brands are doing that, what defines them? What makes them any different or have any unique ability? What makes them bring something unique to market if we're essentially rubbing shoulders with a lot of the same fabric manufacturers, a lot of the same sewing manufacturers, a lot of the same, you look at Gore-Tex or something, right? Like the amount of Gore-Tex in every single product in the world. So in your mind, what's left to define if a handful of factories are producing, so much of the top tier products out there?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes from the brand. What's going to differentiate it, or like you said, they're made in the same place. How are they different? It 100% is it's going to be because of whatever's going on the brand's side, good or bad. However deep that brand wants to go into design and development, like that's what's going to be different about it. So that can be broken down into so many things. So I couldn't just say, oh, it's just the design. Well, what is the design based on, or who's designing it, or who's providing feedback on those prototypes? So, for us, when I talk about like our business organization and structure, we're like, so we can create a design and that would differentiate it, but there's more behind it. So, I'm a backpacker that's been doing it for 35 years. So that's something else that may not come to fruition with somebody else's product. But then that product is also being tested by many other people, our own people, where we're receiving real-time face-to-face feedback. We're on a trail in Colorado or Utah or Washington, and you or somebody else on the trip can talk to me face-to-face real-time and say, this is bothering me, or this is working really well, or I forgot about this feature, or whatever it is. So that's another thing that goes underneath the brand that is going to influence how that product is different from another product that's made in one sewing line over. So there's so much into that's really how it's going to be differentiated, is on what all the factors that a brand is willing to put into it.
Yeah, what are the brand's priorities, right?
Exactly, yeah.
The brand's priorities are going to define, because really the factory is just a mechanism to produce whatever it is. It's like you put these inputs in and you get this output. So really the brand pulls all of the levers on what the inputs are, and then the output comes on the other side. But this does pose kind of another question. Are outdoor products being made by professionals? What is our take on professionals? I think this kind of came from, this is a question that was posed, and part of it was this concept that a lot of product design was like super scientific and lots of laboratory testing was being done, and that like if you were designing product, you were like the pinnacle of avid backpacker that also was basically a scientist, which was also a design, like kind of this like super blown out of proportion concept, which I'm not saying there's not a lot of laboratory testing that's involved, from the fabric side to standardizations to, things like that, or that we're not getting like the pinnacle of backpackers to design. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying, are outdoor products being made by professionals, and what's our take on professionals? Because I think that has probably been skewed over time as well.
Yeah, I mean, my problem is, hopefully everybody knows this by now, I can go on, and I will break everything down into more detail. So I'll try to do that, but not do it too much. But I mean, like, what does made mean? Are made by professionals? Define made. Designed, sewn, manufactured, or you know what I mean? Like, so is the idea, does that fall under made? Like, and here's an idea, so that person that had that idea now made that. I'll try to break it down in terms of, let's start with, like, in my mind, what is being physically made, like the actual physical assembly and production of that. So who is making it? I would say 100% those people are the pinnacle of professional sewers. The pretty much all the factories that sew our products, any of our sewn products, like the average sewing experience is 8+ years. And they do it at a rate that, I mean, there's so many like cliche terms to use, like knowing things like the back of your hand. But I've brought this up to you before. I think of the sewing expertise and the manufacturing expertise of the individuals manufacturing products that end up in our customers' hands. The parallel I use is like in like the medical field. Let's say you're a parent and you've got a child, or let's say you've got a spouse that's going into labor, giving birth to a child, and there's a complication. And you've got who you've got at the hospital, right? Like, you've got the staff that's there, and that is who your child is being handled by, right? Do you want, and let's say it's a life-threatening situation. Things have escalated or gone south in the emergency room or the delivery room, and there's life-threatening situation. Do you want a doctor that has dealt with that twice that month? Or do you want the doctor that's done that 3,000 times that month? I think most people would say, yeah, I'll take the doctor that's seen this situation 3,000 times already this month. So that's the level at which I'm speaking of when I talk about the professionals that are putting together sewing and manufacturing the products. So that's that professional side. Like, what about the design side? Maybe that's the other thing. So who's designing it? I mean, really, there's a wide range of who could be designing it. I mean, again, that comes into like what's different about one product from another product being made at the same factory is who's designing it, who's doing the work, who's sourcing the materials. So, and I don't want to, I wouldn't be able to speak negatively about anybody that would be That would be unethical. That would be unfounded. But there is the possibility that there's a differentiation in terms of who is designing it, what skill sets do they have, what experience levels do they have, what understanding do they have, and so I would assume that most large companies or most established companies in the outdoor industry, the people designing it do have a professional level of design skill, and so it's just an understanding of how to design a product so that it functions, that it performs its functions properly, or achieves the aesthetic that they're after, and so for the most part, our products designed by professionals? I think so, but there is the possibility that they're not. How are they influenced? How is that design influenced aside from a designer? Well, there may be, in some company structures, there may be top-down influence where people, of a higher position in a company may have what they feel like is a great idea. And they're like, oh, I heard about this. We really need to push this out the door. And then the design department is just kind of like, okay, yes, yeah, what choice do I have? And so they design this according to one person's will. But then there's another possibility where the product, the entire impetus for a product is based on experience from one person or many people. It's this collective experience of what works and doesn't work, and or what's missing or what could be improved upon, and that kind of directive, however that is formed, whether that's an assignment or just a collective idea of this recognition of a need in a product, all that comes to fruition in that designer's ability to create a design of a product that hopefully performs its function, solves a problem, fills a need, and then is passed on. So, well, who's behind that? Are the people influencing those ideas? Are those professionals? Well, what defines a professional? I mean, I think in a lot of outdoor industries, there are easily, clearly defined lines where you could say that person's a professional. Like if it's a downhill skier, all right, that one's pretty easy. People that are in the Olympics, in the World Cup of downhill skiing, yep, those are professionals. People that get paid at a high level to make videos doing extreme skiing, those are probably professionals. But that doesn't mean that somebody else that doesn't get paid, that their input or feedback on a design process is not valid. It's just well, what is a professional? Man, it's a rabbit hole. I think you could really
it is a rabbit hole. I would say this though, just never assume anything. Never assume that because a product came from XYZ brand, or that it's because of the price point. Let's say you see something with a really high price point. Let's say you see something that looks really good. Just never assume anything that can't be verified, or never assume that this was designed and tested by some professional if you can't see that or prove that for yourself, or you can't do some research on that yourself. Really, assumptions, I think, are the downfall of this. I think it's very common for people to assume things about product design and manufacturing, right? One of the big assumptions that maybe we can talk about here in a minute is, well, a product was made in China, so it's terrible quality, right? Talk about an assumption of, well, clearly there's not a single professional sewer in China. It's astronomical. And they're saying that because of an assumption that, yes, there is absolute crap that comes out of China. Or if you take it the other direction, maybe it's you assume that because this well-known backpack company put these specific pockets on a pack, that they were put there because of function, when in reality they were put there because of aesthetics, right? And so I think when you kind of pull the curtain back on professional, well, does that mean that the professional was a professional backpacker, or was that professional a professional? I can't think of the word, but designer of aesthetics. You know what I mean? Aesthetic designer.
Sure.
Because you can absolutely bring someone and say, hey, make this look better so it'll sell more on a retail shelf versus make this perform better in the field. And both people can be professionals, but professionals are going to matter to you when you've got a different set of priorities. So I would just kind of say with that, never assume anything. On the side of maybe assumptions that can be made when it comes to manufacturing, or realities of kind of being made in America or other locations, I think that's a big one too, to talk about, right? Like, we produce almost nothing in China anymore, but we did, and there was fantastic sewers in China. Most of our stuff now is produced in Vietnam, and I think our opinion on this is that we're manufacturing in facilities that have some of the best sewing workers in the world, and that they have some of the best systems and managers and teams in the world for doing what they do. Does it matter that it comes out of Vietnam? Because you could say, well, maybe I had a product that came out of Vietnam and it wasn't high quality or whatever. And so those kinds of assumptions have real negative effects, and are really kind of, if you were to be one saying those things, can really say a lot about yourself as well without realizing it. But I guess with this, it would be the assumption that maybe manufacturing overseas is that it can be low quality. Say absolutely not true. Like Brigham already alluded to, average age of our, not age, but average length of time people have sewn can range from like in one factory it might be 5 years is the average sewing length of time. In others it might be 8. There's sewers there that have worked there for 20 years sewing. So the amount of skill that they have is just tremendous. People may assume that there's poor working conditions because they've seen a news article or they've seen whatever. And for us, that's a huge important factor as we go into factories, is to see what the working conditions are. Are they up to standard? What are they doing for their employees? Personally, one of the things I love to do is I just love to walk around the factories and look people dead in the eyes and just try to like get to know people. I love to, one of the things that we did on our recent trip, and forgive me if we've already talked about this, is we ate at the cafeteria that all the workers eat at, right? And got to experience what their lunch would be like that would be provided by the factory. Just those touch points say a lot and mean a lot. And obviously we would never produce in a factory that has poor working conditions. And from what we see and what we know, they have very good working conditions. And I think that that's a big part of maybe just from what we see. Besides that, is if their average sewer is there for 8 years, they have the ability to go literally down the street and sew for a different company, right? Like they're not obligated to sew with the factory forever. And they would if the conditions were bad. Like they have a skill set that is in demand in these countries. They could move from factory to factory, and sometimes they do. There is turnover that happens like that. But, when you've got a factory that has a much higher average, length of time of employees' tenures, that says a lot too, as far as just who really wants to be there. Is it a good working condition? They have to be competitive. One of the factories we walked was a brand new factory. And so they actually had to, in their minds, invest more and do more to attract top level sewers into their factory from where they were currently working. So they had to, kind of up some of the things, such as, whether it be cafeterias, breaks, maternity leave, paternity leave, these kinds of things are just like they would in the United States. And so I think that's a myth to just touch on for a second as well. But anything else, I guess, Brigham, in your mind regarding kind of either working overseas or even made in America?
Yeah, I would just say, don't assume anything. Try to just ask questions, ask the right questions, because the reality is you can get something made in Germany that's very high quality, and you can get something made in Germany that's very low quality. You can get something made in the U.S. that's also very high quality. You can also get something made in the U.S. that's very low quality. Same thing happens in Vietnam, China, India, Poland, to assume, I would say, as a consumer, and what I try to put into practice is I am placing limitations on myself if I make an assumption that XYZ brand can't make a good product, and likewise XYZ country is not capable of making a good product. I have now placed significant limitations on my future experiences by those limitations. So like if I say I'm only going to shop XYZ brand, now I've just excluded so many potential good experiences or good products from my life for whatever reason. I'm shopping for XYZ product. Like it's the same thing with brands, products, where products are made. Any country is capable of making a great product, and any country of origin is capable of making a poor product. So keep an open mind and ask the right questions. Don't make assumptions.
How do you ask the right questions? So I'm trying to think of if I'm in consumer mode, I'm purchasing, right? And I want to know these kinds of things. Well, not all companies put this kind of information out. They're not going to be that transparent. They're not going to tell you that level of detail. So let's say I want to buy a car, and I grew up in a family that hated Fords. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean like one Ford car to the next could be drastically different because they could be coming out of different factories. But also like one decade of Ford to one decade of Ford could be insanely different, and so on and so forth, right? And so I don't know. What are your thoughts on just how the heck do you learn this stuff? What are key areas that those listening to this could pay attention to, or areas they could go to learn? Because there's really bad areas to learn, and there's other ones. Like I went on a website recently and was looking at some stuff, and there was clearly some people on there that had no idea what we do. And it's like with 5 minutes of their time, they would have had like everything that they made comments about would have been totally debunked. Right. And so like for us, like that's something that we try to do, is we try to put all this information out there so it's irrefutable that we backpack, that we are, like that we put the time in, that we do this. So we, like we try to just open the playbook, but not every company does. And so how the heck do you go about this? Let's say if you were wanting to figure some of these things out and compare different products around.
Yeah. It is a tough one, and it's, depending on the industry, it's easier in one industry versus another. And I really like the car analogy, and I mean because I like my dad is kind of the same way about I think it is Ford. Like he has this, I don't remember, I may be wrong. Let's call it brand X, but like he thinks that brand X like is just inferior to brand Y, but my dad's 72. So you're telling me that the design staff has been the same at those companies for 50 years or 60 years, Like, no, there are different people designing and then manufacturing those products, turning over all the time. So how could that assumption that brand X vehicles continue through generations to just be worse or inferior to brand Y? And I think the best, I don't want to use the word best, but a really good way that I have found is to look internally. What do I need, and what am I basing that on? Hopefully experience. So what experiences have I had that have helped me determine what I prefer or don't prefer, what I like, dislike, what I need versus what I want, and look inward, and then try to use that base of experience to look for cues that tell me, hey, that addresses a need or a problem that I've had. They are telling me something that resonates with me because I'm recognizing that could solve a problem that I've had. So look at needs, experience, and how a brand is telling you that they are addressing that. So when you have that objectiveness, like who cares what brand is telling you how they've solved it, look for the solution that is the most attractive or appealing to you. That's kind of how I have evolved my decision-making process with all kinds of products and industries. Is I don't again, like if it's cars, man, brand X could come out with a perfect car for me, but if I have this 30-year-old assumption that brand X sucks, like, they make it in this place, brand X. Like, I am just excluding that potential great experience because I've made an assumption.
Yeah, I'm sitting here running through a bunch of scenarios, and I'm realizing I hope this isn't, going down a different rabbit hole, but I feel like it is incredibly important to cover. So I want to cover it. We've seen personally, I would say we've had a lot of what we call PR lately, which means articles written about us, reviews, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing that we've learned, we've spent trail miles with people. We've got to know people, et cetera. And the thing that I feel like you see on the other side of that is no medium is perfect. Right? Like, you've got writers, and these writers may be super passionate about one thing, kind of going back to that professionalism mindset. They might be the biggest fly fisher in the world, but they're, the people that they write for might say, all right, write about this backpack. They are a professional and they're a professional writer, but maybe this is going to change. We've also, so that's one option. The other thing is that we've seen is, let's say it's a company that looks like they do everything very, very factual with empirical data. They put it on big spreadsheets. They make it look super like broken down, like it's ranked this, and that gives us this overall score. We've seen complete errors in those kinds of things, our products, other people's products, etc. And then to get even bigger, man, I've been down a rabbit hole lately with just media in general and the terrifying nature that that the USA is, I don't know about the rest of the world, is in with the control of media, news, etc. And so this goes levels upon levels upon levels deep. You go back to the car manufacturer. Well, if a car manufacturer is literally giving this TV channel 40% of all of their advertising budget, are they ever going to talk about something negative about the car, about this brand? Let's say this brand did a massive mistake, but this brand is also paying them 40% of their revenues a month. They're probably not going to report on that item, right? And it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. So what I think is, I sit back and I look at this and I try to evaluate what would I educate people on or what would I, what's the tips I have? It would be to educate yourself to the point that you can see through mistakes or bullcrap,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so much to talk about. Let's just talk about like written media, which is kind of going away, but let's include also digital media with written media, right? So I just think that one's own experiences are infinitely more valuable than any reviewer or panel of reviewers' comments about any product. So I think that's it's a really important thing to keep in mind is whether a review written is 100% objective, there's no financial incentive whatsoever. Still take that with a grain of salt and a lot of skepticism and contrast it and compare it with your own experience and give it the smell test. If something seems inconsistent with what you have formulated through your own experience, don't trust the outside source. Reviews are really helpful, especially when they're like user reviews that are unincentivized. They're not from a media entity. But still compare that to your own experience. And I get it that there are people out there that don't have a lot of experience. But whatever experience you do have, that is the most valuable. That is 100% the most valuable information that you have is your own experience. And then look for tidbits, again, that are cues. Look for somebody that has a review and the things that they say and the way they talk about it, you connect with. You recognize that that way that individual is speaking or the experiences they have are similar to your own. And then that person's now feedback becomes more valuable because it's more relatable to your own. With the media and like kind of the professional nature of like a lot of the people writing articles to review a product, and not just in our industry and many industries, they are journalists first. Like they grew up wanting to be a writer. They grew up wanting to write for XYZ magazine. They went to college, maybe graduate school. They got degrees in journalism or English or both. And then they pursued this life of writing. And not everybody gets to, I would say, most writers don't land the job that's their dream job. They land a job so that they can pay the bills. And then they spend their career bouncing from one to the other or freelance to try to do what they like to do, but still number one priority is to be a writer. And so there's writers out there writing reviews for products out there that like they might go backpacking once a year and now they're judging some brand's boots, you know what I mean, or shoes or socks. And so that's another kind of misconception, I would say. Just be very wary of what you're reading or watching, because somebody's true expertise may not be in understanding a product and how it could benefit you. Their expertise is in filling a quota of characters on a page. Like 100%, that's the reality. They need a 727-word article, and they only have a limited time to acquire products to test and review, and they're going to review what they get, and then, you know, again, so there's a lot to be aware of.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaways from that would be think for yourself and do your own critical analysis of what's out there for your own reasons, right? I would say like little things, like you mentioned reviews. Even reviews that look extremely organic and authentic can be manipulated. I've had situations where I've written 1-star reviews on products that were absolutely terrible that never ended up on the product, right? You can, brands will do it. They'll pull things down. Also, in the same vein, you know, you may go to our website and be like, man, these are all 4 or 5-star reviews. Maybe they're too high. Well, that might be, you know, some of our raging loyal fans are writing all the reviews. And so whether it's overly positive or overly negative or whatever it is, your ability to think for yourself, be critical, are going to pay massive, massive dividends. Don't take one person's opinions for things. Don't rush decisions, you know, that are especially important ones like a vehicle. You know, take your time to and develop that skill set, I would say, of being critical. Nothing is ever perfect. We didn't cover that. We probably don't have time to today, but there's always trade-offs, right? You'll see this time and time again, whether it be in videos or written. You'll hear people say, you know, this is the best tent fabric ever. This is the best backpack fabric ever. There's always trade-offs, right? And sometimes they're, you know, durability trade-offs. Sometimes they're weight trade-offs. Sometimes they're price trade-offs, but there's no such thing as the word best. Really, when it comes to design, it comes to manufacturing, it comes to myths about all this, everyone's trying to design the best product they can, manufacture the best product they can with the limitations, the inputs that the brands decide to control.
Priorities. The
priorities of that brand. And I think that we've covered that today. I think we've peeled back the curtain for people that were not as in the know of how manufacturing works, how many partners and factories are involved with a single product. We've covered the concept of, you know, professionals. Who are professionals? What profession are they professional at? Why that matters for you. You know, we've covered a litany of things, but I think it all points back to the big takeaway for anyone still listening at this point is, you know, you should be doing your own research. You should be understanding as much as you can. You should be critical and be able to think for yourself and take everything with a grain of salt. I think that, you know, being in the middle bell curve of opinions does not get people to click and read articles. It does not get people to watch videos. It does not get people to fill in the blank. So being able to realize all of those things is going to translate into you getting the best possible gear, making the best possible choices, and considering all of the factors that are both seen and unseen when it comes to manufacturing. So any final thoughts, Brigham?
Yeah, just on the general podcast theme for today of helping the audience further understand how their gear is made. I'll just say, to round out or give you a general all-encompassing status of how we do things, try to describe that is trying to find the best balance of our time and resources to capitalize on getting the best we can from multiple sources and compiling that to design and create the best product we can for a prioritized purpose. So we're drawing on so many bright minds and skill sets. We're drawing on engineers that create raw fibers out of a chemical composition. We're drawing on yarn manufacturers, fabric manufacturers, zipper manufacturers, lamination facilities, the minds that make the machines that can calibrate temperature and pressure for seam taping. We're drawing on so many minds, and then and capitalizing all of that, exploiting all of those resources, and then just using our own minds and experience to find the best way to apply all of that to the best product that we can for a prioritized purpose. That's how we do things. Hopefully, we're just continually learning. We're continually trying to improve and do the best that we can for our products, for our customers. And I'd say that would kind of just round out like that's how we try to do things.
Yeah. One word I think you'll never hear around our office is complacency. I think you'll just always see us pushing forward, continually improving, being tenacious about that. We're always going to be doing exactly what Brigham said. And the reason for that is, our goal is to design the best performing products we possibly can. They're going to make both mine and Brigham's hobby of backpacking better, right? Like, we personally care that the performance of the goods gets better and better because, I don't know if you've ever added this up, but I average 30 nights a year, out in the backcountry pretty consistently. And so it obviously matters if I'm getting crappy sleep. It really does matter to me. Mm-hmm. It doesn't just matter from terms of business, it matters personally. And you'll always see us pushing to improve the performance of our products. And you can learn a lot more about that on some different podcasts as well. But it's something that is personal to us. It's something that we are doing our absolute best at, and we will only get better at it, at performing better or at designing better and better products. And that's through our own efforts, and it's through, again, partners of ours and just a million bright minds around the world that continue to push innovation forward. So, okay, let's go ahead and wrap this up, Brigham. I think that was a really interesting podcast. I think that people can learn a lot from that. Before we let them go, though, is there anything new going around that we should make them aware of? Obviously, if you're in the 100-mile challenge, that's wrapping up. That's been a phenomenal event. We had a bunch of, hundreds and hundreds of you guys participating in that, and that's been super powerful to see. Keep this on your radar if you're not in there to join next year. It's a DIY 100-mile challenge that you can either do an all-in-one effort or broken up. And it's been really cool to watch it push people, to watch people, improve their physical abilities, improve their, or whatever it is, just throw a dart at the board on the calendar and make it happen, make an actual real amazing trip happen. Other things going on right now, we're getting closer and closer to the CS40 being here and shipping. So if you want pre-sale pricing on the CS40, go check that out. That is our new backpack utilizing Ultra fabrics and carbon fiber frame. More and more feedback keeps pouring in from those people that we are able to get the packs into their hands. It's just all been so positive. It's the Shadowlight has been and will continue to be an amazing product for us. But now we've got two amazing packs that are almost competing against themselves. I feel like when I'm looking at some of the numbers, because I can't recommend one over the other. I mean, they are really impressive. But the CS40, if you want the pre-sale pricing, it's a phenomenal pack. It's a very streamlined pack, amazing durability, and just amazing comfort with that carbon fiber frame and the work we put into the harness and support structure. So anything else that's just happening right now that we should mention?
That's why I was looking at my phone. I was checking my calendar. PCT Trail Days will be there August 18th and 19th. Love to see anybody swing by, chat. We're planning on taking CS40s for purchase to trail days as long as they're here by then. So you'll be able to get hands-on, try them on, walk away with one after handing us some money. And love to see anybody out there. So August 18th, 19th, we'll be at PCT Trail Days in Oregon. I don't know.
It's exciting. It's a good time to be outside. Lots of things going on in the world. Always make sure to prioritize your own time outside, your own mental health, your own well-being. I know we are. We're going to be hitting the trail. We're going to be outside a ton. What do they say? You make hay when the sun's shining or something like that. And it's the sun shining here. So we're going to the high country and we are getting some miles in, getting some nights in out there, and really looking forward to it. So, okay, if you guys have not yet subscribed to the podcast, please do. If you've not left us a review, please do so. As we've talked about today, those are extremely important for people to sort through the clutter of this world and know if something is worthwhile or not. So please do that. And that said, if you have any of our products that you have not written a review on, go do so. It really is valuable for people that are trying to make informed decisions. So, okay, hopefully you guys are subscribed, and we'll see you guys in a future episode.